Welcome back to the Meeting Mastery podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Frampton, the CEO and co-founder of SalesQ, and we have a guest here today that is someone that means a lot to me because I hired them actually at Vidyard, and now they're absolutely crushing it over there. Alley Forbes, previously known as Allie Newman. Congratulations, by the way. Excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I was very excited when you asked. I've watched all the episodes, so I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Very nice. Which one was your favorite episode? I know one's your current boss, so you might have to lie to me. But
I did really enjoy the one you did with Evan Santa, just because I only worked for him for a short period of time, and how we spoke about he's more of a builder, not just like a manager. So that was really insightful.
Awesome. I wanted to bring you on the podcast specifically because I know that you faced a lot of different adversity in the early aspects of your career. And now if someone looks at your LinkedIn profile, you're a manager over at Vidyard and people would think you're crushing it, but it hasn't always felt like that in your career, like for everybody that's been on this podcast. So curious, I don't know where you want to take it, but what specifically stands out to you? Because that's really what we want to dive into.
Yeah, great question. I'm sure pretty much everyone has mentioned on this podcast that LinkedIn is your highlight reel, and majority of, I would say, any career is adversity. So there are a few that stand out, but then also has helped me with my current success and has helped my team as well. But I think where it all started was back in November 2019 when I got laid off for the first time. I was working for a small startup. It was their first account executive hire. I was a full-time employee, but a contractor. So they could technically let me go whenever they felt like it. They were an outbound sales consulting firm, which actually gave me a lot of experience for tons of different industries in terms of just how they even do sales, which translated into Vidyard selling. Anyhow, I digress. So a year and a day after working for them, just bought a house with my now husband. Christmas was around the corner. I get a phone call in the morning and I just had this sinking feeling that it wasn't good. And it was that I was being laid off for reasons outside of my control. Not every startup is a success. So they were basically downsizing in order to get bought out. So that was the first time I really experienced, I've experienced failure, but I experienced failure in a way where I was doing everything right, working hard, and I just felt like a failure. Like the imposter syndrome really starts to set in. I'm also like mid-20s. There's like this saying that your brain isn't really fully formed at that time. So I didn't have the emotional maturity to deal with it properly either. So that happened in November. And then, as most folks know, especially now, finding a job is a full-time job. And I couldn't imagine how difficult it is these days. But after a few months of searching, I wrote an article actually of what it feels like to be let go, just relating it back to sports. I used to play varsity volleyball and it got noticed, and I got a lot of referrals, one specifically for an enterprise account executive role at ZipRecruiter. I actually was applying for Vidyard at the same time and get an offer at the same time as well, but we'll circle back. A grueling interview process. And I remember reading the job description and I really wasn't qualified for the role. Like they wanted 5 or 10 years of enterprise sales experience. I maybe had probably 1.5 years of applicable experience. I've had three years of sales, but I would say like 1.5 of legitimate experience. Somehow I managed to get the role. So don't let any job qualification criteria deter you from applying if you're watching this. So I got the offer for Zip. I got an offer at Vidyard. I wanted to just try enterprise, just shoot my shot. So that's the route that I went. My first day was February 2020. Life was good. No one really knew what was around the corner. I do remember flying. A lot of folks were wearing masks in the airport. So I guess it was the beginning to the end, for lack of a better term. I come home. So I was there for a month in Arizona doing training with the ZipRecruiter team. Coming home March 2020. Not a lot of companies needed a hiring platform because they were letting folks go. And I was a part of a mass layoff. I expected it to come as well. And yeah, so that was just another moment where I felt like a true failure. Like I worked my tail off to somehow convince them to hire me, like knowing I wasn't qualified, but I knew I could do the job just fine. It'll just take me maybe a couple months more to learn everything. But to get the job, I hit all my ramp targets, booked a number of meetings with Vidyard free because we weren't a customer, or Zip wasn't a customer. I don't think they are at the time of Vidyard. And then just got let go, felt like a failure, and then really put a lot of pressure on myself to land my next role, but also do really well in my next role, because I felt like if I get let go, or if I'm not good at this, then what am I going to do? Who else is going to hire me? Do I even believe in myself? Just everyone was on freeze for a while. Luckily, I didn't burn any bridges with Vidyard after not accepting the role. It's always important to have a good network and have a positive reputation. Once Vidyard was hiring, yourself, Evan Santa at the time, welcomed me with open arms and open hearts. So I started as an emerging account executive in June 2020 at Vidyard, and then put a lot of pressure on myself, not to just be okay, but to be the best. And that hindered me a lot. It didn't let me focus on the right things. I was too focused on, like, why is this person doing so well? Like comparing myself to people who I shouldn't be comparing myself to. I wasn't focused on the right things. And as I said, I felt like if I wasn't good at this job, no one else would want me. I really don't know what the switch was. It was a few months not doing well at all revenue wise, a couple tears, which was embarrassing. And then finally, I just focused on myself, focus on what I could do better, focus on the process. Obviously, it's working for other folks. So that's what I'm going to do. So I would say that was a pretty big struggle. And then I became a manager in April 2022, after Ryan just left Vidyard for Hypercomply. And then I was a manager, and there was no handbook. They're also like, here, Alley, you're a manager. By the way, another manager is leaving, so you're going to have 2 teams to manage. Also, the start of an economic downturn, I felt very over my head. I still do. Imposter syndrome was very real. I was just keeping the lights on, for lack of a better term, and I felt like it wasn't growing in terms of looking for ways to grow the business, grow my team. It was hard for me to find certain levers to pull to be even like 1% better in terms of outcomes, because it was a struggle and a challenge at first. It still is, but we've seen some momentum. But really just running with my head cut off for my first 6 months as a manager. And then we finally hired someone else. So we split up the teams. I got a new boss, Jenna, who's been on this podcast, who I really enjoy working with and working for. And she showed me a lot of the ropes in terms of what a director level role job, what they look for in terms of pulling those levers and growing a business and scaling a team.
Awesome. No, I think there's so many learnings in there. I think to name a few, one is don't burn a bridge, right? When you're making these what seem critical decisions, I'm either opening one door and closing another. You don't actually need to close another door if you treat the relationship with the right mentality. When you're going through making these career decisions, like, it's not a yes or no to everything. If you treat everybody well, you can keep all the doors open in the future. So I think that's one really cool lesson. I think the biggest thing I'm hearing from your story, which I think is really important for these times for people to hear, is you had a lot of imposter syndrome, which I 100% have experienced in my career. Managing, I think, 22 people at 24 years old. I tried to hide my age. Like, I wouldn't tell anybody my age. You were probably a part of that team and nobody would know. And then I think Toledo one time asked me, like, hey, how old are you? And I told her, and then it started getting out. And it's something where, like, you doubt yourself for whatever reason, or whether it's your age, whether past experiences, or quote unquote failures and things that happen to you. But one really interesting thing about how you handle it is you don't let it hold you back. You just keep going. Like, you get laid off in a sales role, you keep going. You get laid off in a sales role, you keep going, and then you struggle, and then you keep going, and then now look, right? So it's really just about, everybody's going to have that stuff going through their head, and you can either make yourself quit because of it, or learn to manage it and just keep taking one step forward. So
Yeah.
that's something that I really respect out of your career.
Yeah, it's also finding the right people to work for. I remember the second time I was interviewing, someone told me I was too young and it was too early in my career to be making as much money as I was. I wish I remember who it was because I would love to follow up with them. And I had someone who they use a personality test to hire, which is so silly. If that ever happens, if that's a true decision making factor, do not work for the company. But based on my personality test, I wasn't a good fit for the company. And honestly, I wasn't based on what happened, but it was just like, here's this 50-page report on why you're not a good fit. So there are like people that will try to bring you down, but you just have to believe, at least try to believe in yourself, even if you have those days where you don't.
Even just about the age side, and I think it goes both ways, like depending how old you are or how young you are. I think there's a lot of preconceived notions. I was in a room one time, a hypothetical room nowadays, a Zoom room, when I was at a company. I won't say which company it was at, and we're going to hire someone and we wanted to put her an offer, and they asked for a certain dollar value that they thought they were worth. It made complete financial sense. We would give that person that dollar value, but someone in the room said, "Hey, aren't they a little bit too young and inexperienced to be asking for that amount of money?" And I was like, "What do you mean? If they didn't look young, would we offer that amount of money to do this role? Yes. Then why are we asking that question?" Why do you think people have that mentality?
People just have their own preconceived notions just based on their own experiences. All about paying your dues, which I do agree with. You have to learn and you have to go through pains. I just relate it back to sports when like rookies come in. It's
Yeah.
I had to go through this as a rookie, so you do too, sort of thing, which I think is silly. Let your work speak for itself. Be humble, but also be bold when necessary and just do what's right for you.
I know you mentioned some other aspects of your journey around getting into management. I feel like too many leaders are just thrown under the bus as new leaders. What were some things that you were able to do during your first few months as a leader to chip away at like getting more comfortable in that role?
I knew the sales process. I knew it worked well because I did it well, not to toot my own horn by the end, not at the beginning. But also using my struggles as a way to help my team as well. So just relying on the process, relying on coaching. I had yourself as a coach, Josh Kirkham as a coach. I had a lot of good coaches and people to emulate. I also had to hire 3 new reps within my first few weeks as a manager. So really just focused on making sure they had a good experience, making sure they were learning and ramping as quickly as they could. But what I knew that helped me at the beginning is that I made a lot of mistakes when I was an account executive. So I trusted that whatever mistakes I was going to make, it would help me down the line. But also, like, I wanted my reps to make mistakes. I didn't want to be on all of their calls because I would just end up stepping in and bulldozing the conversation and getting the deal done. It's great for your number and my number, but what's that really going to do for any of us down the line? So I wanted people to mess up as quickly as possible. Of course, I was there to support them. And if they really needed me, I absolutely would, but I just put the ball in my reps court, still doing coaching and what you and Josh did with me when I was a rep. And then when Jenna came on board, she really helped me just by being a manager herself, nail down like the performance management and the people management process, not just the sales process and how to sell everything outside of that in a consistent way, in a supportive way.
That makes a ton of sense. One other thing that we like to do on the Meeting Mastery podcast is have the sales leaders that come on give a meeting tip for all the sellers out there. So if you were an account executive today, or maybe what you're coaching your current team to be doing on their calls, what would you say is like your top meeting tip that everybody should be focusing on?
I would say focus on when we're doing a disco, have a consistent process, but make sure your questions are surrounding what your champion cares about from a business perspective, not just from a product or software perspective. So really understanding what they care about, what they're trying to do from a business perspective. Is this a priority for them, but also their CFO, their board, or whoever else makes the decisions? Because it's harder to get things signed off, harder than it was like 2-3 years ago. So you really have to focus on the business impact. So if you can get that in your discovery, when you're highlighting each feature of your product, find a way to relate the feature back, whether it's through a customer story, whether it's through an average stat. Just find a way to provide real value with everything that you're showing would be my main tip. And then also just making sure like you're consultative, you're there to help. There's the saying called quota breath. You never want quota breath. Like you're here to help regardless of the outcome. Obviously we want the deal done, but your job as a seller is to help. It's to educate and get them across the line. And then lastly, would just find ways to be creative. What I find what separates good sellers from great sellers is that anyone who's ready to buy, an average account executive can get them over the line. Well, what's great sellers is that they can drag people across the line, for lack of a better term, of course, knowing that they need the solution and the solution that will help. So just find ways to get those folks that are on the fence to get them across the line.
Yeah, like going above and beyond to showcase business value. I know the first step to your point is if you don't know what the business value that they need is, you have zero shot. So asking them the questions like, not only what inspired you to come on the call today, and then they go like, I saw you had a HubSpot integration. It's like, hey, what is the business and your boss like really trying to focus on today at the business? And then once you understand that, whether it's driving more traffic to the website so that more funnel can be driven there because all the conversion rates are good and you just need more at the very top, or wherever that funnel is broken is really where you're addressing. And then sometimes, to your point, people immediately click with that and say, okay, that makes sense. Here's my credit card. Times they need to visualize it or see it demonstrated in different ways. And your ability as a rep to get creative. I know you were always someone to like whip out Canva and make like custom things for people. And like you'd go above and beyond, which is why you would get more deals across the line than the average person that was instead spending that time watching Succession on their TV or something.
Yeah, exactly. Be specific with your question. A good Vidyard example is like sometimes we'll ask, what do you think video can help you with? But don't even use the word video. What are you focused on? And that way I can see if Vidyard can actually help you with that.
Yeah. Don't start with the solution, start with the problem and then see if it ties. And it might not tie. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Alley, I know we're up on time here. Really appreciate you joining the podcast today. Now, a quick word from the company that powers the podcast. Talk soon, everybody.
Cheers.
Watching call recordings on 2x speed is not only exhausting, but is also a waste of time for sales reps and leaders. With SalesQ, you can take concise notes with just a click of a button during your calls, so you can stay focused on the conversation. These notes are visible in real time, ensuring that you have all the critical information you need while it matters. After the call, the notes are automatically added to your CRM, providing your sales leader with all the information they need. Sales leaders no longer need to spend hours watching calls to identify if their coaching has been implemented. They can simply add feedback to SalesQ, and their sales team will be reminded in real time to execute on it. Sales reps can also submit evidence of their implementation of the feedback with just a click of a button, giving sales leaders an accurate picture of how the team was adopting their coaching. Want to help a specific rep improve? You can view calls where feedback was missed within your favorite call recording platform. Experience a more efficient way of managing your sales team with SalesQ.